Hello, ladies and gentlemen, 'tis I, Michael A. Grimm, aka the Multi-Voice. I have many voices, but one opinion. And this time I have a good opinion to talk about. It's pretty obvious how I am with Halloween. I love classic monsters, and it's universal monsters. I mean, I always have a soft spot to the Universal monsters, from Dracula to Frankenstein, Frankenstein's Bride, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Creature of the Black Lagoon, you name it. And I have to say, one thing I noticed that the Universal theme park's been doing lately is they've been making a Universal Monsters theme park as Halloween night. And, I, noticed that, most of their Halloween themed on their theme park has their own story going, and I had to say some of their stories are getting pretty good. I mean, they would have been good enough to be the next, horror movie as a reboot to the Universal Monsters. But, sadly, due to the strike going on in Hollywood because of all the writers and actors going on strike because of most of this Hollywood CEO producers are trying to replace actors with AIs and even writers with AIs. Yeah, I mean, I'm not on board on that either. And even I noticed that most of the movies are going woke, and I have to say, if you go woke, you're gonna go broke. But anyway, with that aside, I had to say that the Universal Monster movies have gone through a long, bumpy ride, believe it or not. I mean, ever since when they did their last Universal Monsters hurrah, it was Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. And then, ever since in the beginning of 2000s and such, there were a lot of movies that are Universal base, and some of them become successful, others didn't. And to start this whole thing off, I want to talk about, I mean, I remember that Universal did a remake of Dracula back in the 70s starring Frank Langella, which is Frankenstein. I mean, not Frankenstein, Dracula. Now, that was a pretty good movie, and Frank Langella did a really great job, and one thing that he did the same thing what Bela Lugosi did, because a little known fact, my favorite actor, Bela Lugosi, who played Dracula, he played Dracula in the play first, and then he had the part in the movie. And that's what happened to Frank Langella. He played Dracula in the play, and then he did his role in the movie with Laurence Olivier as Van Helsing. And that was a pretty damn good Dracula adaptation. Now let's talk about the other ones they made, shall we? All of a sudden, the Universal decided to make their version of Brendan Fraser's The Mummy. Now, the first movie was good. It was really good. The sequel was awesome. Third one, yeah, I mean, it was okay, but they had to recast. I mean, they had to remove Rachel Weisz with another actress. That sucked. And then they tried to connect. I mean, they even did it again when they made Hugh Jackman's version of Van Helsing, which, sadly, it didn't do good in the box office, but to me, I love the movie, and I'll always love that version of Van Helsing, and also, I love the style. I mean, the hat, the long coat, and all that. I mean, I always thought it's the coolest and badass looking Van Helsing I've ever seen. It's just too bad not many people don't even think of this movie as a good movie. Well, it's their loss. And then after they did, and of course, one thing they did before the movie, they also did a prequel animated movie of Van Helsing, which focused on Jekyll and Hyde. So it kind of explains what happened before Jekyll was about ready to deal with, before Van Helsing deals with Jekyll and Hyde. And then they made this one called The Wolfman back in 2010. Now, my thoughts, I've seen that movie. I have seen The Wolfman with Benicio del Toro and Anthony Hopkins and Emily Blunt and Hugo Weaving. I thought that movie was a good movie. It had a bit of flaws along the way, but all in all, it was a pretty good werewolf movie, and you would say that the werewolf was a slasher in a way, because, unlike other slasher movies where you have killers who carry in butcher knives or any cutting utensils, the werewolf only uses his claws and kills people with his fangs and claws, and always had that old tradition, a man who is pure of heart, who says his prayer by night, and the full moon rise when the wolfbane blooms at night would become a wolf. That was the old legend it was the old prophecy that they made for the movie. And then all of a sudden they decided to make their version of Dracula Untold. Now, I mentioned this one before, but Dracula Untold, it was good, but it was way too cliche. It's the same premise they've done 1,000 times. Dracula was Vlad the Impaler. He becomes a vampire, battling against the Turks, slaughtered them while raising a vampire army, but now becomes Lord of the Vampires. And then they end the movie where he meets Mina Harker, who resembled his lost love. That's a lather, rinse, repeat premise here, for crying out loud. That's the same premise they use 12 times in every single vampire movie. You always have a vampire who lost somebody they love, and then they became a vampire, and when they woke up, they always meet a girl who resembles their lost love, saying that they are the reincarnated of the woman they love, which is getting kind of boring, and it wasn't any of the Dracula films that pretty much took that premise. Believe it or not, that premise belonged to The Mummy. Because it was The Mummy with Boris Karloff who took that premise that the girl was a reincarnation of the princess that Imhotep, the mummy himself, fell in love with. Oh yeah, and in case some of you are going to be asking me, yes, I have seen the Nicolas Cage Renfield, which I gotta say, that movie was nuts, and it was really cool. And of course, it was the first time you ever see Nicolas Cage playing Count Dracula! Yeah! Of course, I try to be more like Dracula. Yeah. At least I don't go blah blah blah. I always wanted to add that. I do not go blah blah blah. But now I heard that there's a new Dracula movie coming out called The Last Voyage of the Demeanor, which what they did is they're just taking one of the stories from Bram Stoker's novel of Dracula and talking about what happened to most of the sailors who were in the Demeter. And everybody knows that the premise goes, Dracula risen out of his coffin in the Demeter. He was really hungry, so one by one he kills every single sailors, suck all their blood, and toss them out in sea until the captain lashed himself to the wheel, and he became the last victim to Dracula before he jumped out of the boat as a wolf and go all the way to Cofrax Abbey where his new home is at. but I guess it has more details into it. And then they did it again. Now, I don't know if this is part of Universal or not, but they made this one movie called I, Frankenstein. Now, this one is not... This one is actually based by the comic book by the same name. And the difference between the comic book and the movie was dealing against angels and demons who are on a never-ending war of demons trying to bring about hell on earth. And the monster, Frankenstein, the Frankenstein monster, is the key to help the demons raise an army, a bunch of armies with no souls. Since the monster, he is created from Frankenstein without a soul. That was the whole premise of the story. A lot of people say that Frankenstein is a creature created by Frankenstein who has no soul. But of course, in the comic book, the monster deals with werewolves and vampires. And one thing I had to say, there was another Frankenstein movie they made. I thought it would be part of Universal, but it's 20th Century Fox, which is Victor Frankenstein, starring Charles Xavier, James McAvoy, and Harry Potter, Daniel Radcliffe. Now, I thought that was a really good premise and a really good story. McAvoy is Dr. Frankenstein, while Radcliffe was Igor the Hunchback, and pretty much showed most of their friendship between the doctor and the assistant. I thought it was a good story. I thought it was a good premise and it was a good movie, but it just wasn't part of Universal, which I wish it was. But then Universal did it again when they made The Phantom of the Opera, starring that Scottish actor Gerard Butler and that actress from that series Shameless. Yeah, that's right. The actress who played Christine was also in that series called Shameless. And I guess, one thing I know about her is she is in real life a pop diva. So I guess that's how she got the part on The Phantom of the Opera, even though she was way younger than Gerard Butler. So, kinda awkward. Hot under the collar. Ooh. But The Phantom of the Opera was a good movie. They did a pretty good job on that one. And then, all of a sudden, that's when they kept on announcing their reboot called The Dark Universe. It's supposed to be like the Universal monster in a dark universe. It's supposed to be darker, scarier, and threatening. And that's when they created another movie. And this one has Tom Cruise, which is The Mummy. Except this time, the mummy is a woman, and Tom Cruise is immortal, and somehow has the ability to become the one who is supposed to be stopping other monsters. And also Russell Crowe playing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So it's trying to be more of a cinematic universe, but in the Universal monster kind of way. That's why they must have called it the Dark Universe. It's a dark cinematic universe with the Universal monsters. But sadly, that movie with Tom Cruise, most people remember him from the Mission Impossible movies, so a lot of people thought it was just a supernatural version of Mission Impossible. Out of all the actors in the world, why Tom Cruise? They should have somebody else. Maybe have Hugh Jackman back, probably playing Van Helsing. And then they made another movie, which a lot of people do say it was a really good one, and it had a pretty awesome idea. They did The Invisible Man, but unlike the Invisible Man that we know, which he was a scientist who created a formula, and when he drank the potion, he becomes invisible, but the effects of the potion made him into a raving lunatic, which I know that Hollow Man took that premise. You know, the one starring Kevin Bacon. But this version of the Invisible Man took an entirely different premise, which I gotta say, it is really impressive. Unlike the guy who drunks a potion and become invisible, this one involves a woman who is going through a horrible, toxic relationship. And this guy, he becomes obsessive towards her, that he invented an invisibility suit. A suit, it would make him go invisible. And what he does, make her life a living hell. He kept stalking her, he kept killing her friends, and making others think that she is going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But one thing she had to do is trying to outsmart him and play his own game. Now, I don't know about you, but that is a pretty interesting premise right there. Instead of a formula going invisible and make you go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, this one is about a guy who is already cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but an obsessive stalker type, who kept stalking this one girl with his invisibility suit. Now, that was a pretty interesting premise, and I gotta say, damn good work. And then they made another one where they were making a Creature of the Black Lagoon premise. And they also kind of make it as a part of a Beauty and the Beast romance. And that movie I'm talking about is called Shape of the Water, created by Guillermo del Toro. Now, Shape in the Water is supposed to be about the creature himself. Now, according to the legend, the creature is supposed to be a missing link, a prehistoric being between man and fish. It's supposed to be saying that he is a fish who evolves into a being, like an amphibian who is evolved into a being. And that is a pretty good premise, and I kind of like the idea. I mean, I haven't seen it yet, because there are some movies I can watch and others I can't. I had to pay for it, or have that free trial bull crap. But I'm sure it is a pretty interesting movie, because I kind of like the premise. The fish man, all of a sudden, or the gill man as they call him, falls in love with this woman, which nobody understands her because she's a mute. So, she's being outcast because she's a mute. But this fish man falls in love with her and start having this Beauty and the Beast kind of relationship. Now, despite of all the movies they made, I mean, like I said, my chair's always been acting odd lately. I think I need a better one. But anyway, Universal Monster has gone through a long, bumpy ride. But there's one thing I would like to say. I hope you guys enjoyed my audio drama I made last Halloween ago, Phantom vs. Dracula in the Opera. And after I made that audio, I thought it was time that that should be an ongoing premise for the new Universal Monster reboots. Now, I'm kind of spitballing on this one, but I was thinking, what if we had the classic monsters, of course, but have Van Helsing be the Nick Fury of the group by creating a group of monster hunters and And also, let the long-forgotten monsters, which most of them are actually human, become members of the Monster Hunter team. I mean, Van Helsing, he starts uniting a group of people who are outcasts that people thought of them as monsters, but they also have special skills and abilities that they become valuable for Van Helsing's team. And he also should reunite with the Phantom of the Opera. And the reason why I would say Phantom of the Opera, because if you ever think about it, the Phantom is more like Batman in a way. I mean, he's just a mortal human being with a facial deformity. I mean, if you read the books, Eric, aka the Phantom, has a deformity where his face kind of looked like a skull. So he hides it, but he traveled around the world learning about fencing and all that. He was a pretty smart guy, and he haunts the opera in Paris. Oui, oui, monsieur. It is the opera here in Paris. No? And, of course, Eric is a lot like Batman because people think of Batman as some sort of apparition, ghost, or demon. He haunts the opera, and people think he's some sort of ghost or a demon who haunts the opera. But he's just a normal man with a lot of tricks and gadgets and such, and even knew how to fight with a sword. And another character I think they should have be a part of the team. He should be like the acrobatic muscle known as Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Now, for those of you who... I mean, I know some of you are going to be telling me, but Disney own it, but... Hunchback of Notre Dame is part of the... of the public domain. So, sure, Disney made their adaptation of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, but a lot of people do forget about the silent film with Lon Chaney Sr. as Quasimodo. And what he is he's a physical, deformed person with a hump on his back who grew up in the Church of Notre Dame, being the bell ringer. And years growing up around bells and everything, he's acrobatic, so he knows how to do jumps and everything. And of course, there's a little hint. I mean, some people are saying that in the Hunchback of Notre Dame books, some people are saying that Quasimodo is a changeling. Now, for those of you who look up on mythologies and folklore, changeling are sort of a mixture between an elf or a fairy, and he's just a mystical being who got switched by one of the children that the mother went completely crazy over. So that's why Quasimodo is deformed, because he might be a changeling. Makes a lot of sense, but it's up to you if you want to make him human or not. Now, another character I thought would be pretty cool to be in this is, of course, Gwynplaine, also known as the Man Who Laughs. Now, I know some of you are saying he looks like the Joker. Yeah, I know, because the Joker was based by the Man Who Laughs. But for those of you who don't know the story of the Man Who Laughs, Gwynplaine was a normal average kid. His family, they pretty much did something to his cheeks. They must have cut his cheeks and give him this permanent grin. So he'll always be smiling 24/7, even though he's not smiling on purpose. He cannot stop smiling. He's just like this constantly. And that's his story. Gwynplaine, they just deformed his face to give him this permanent grin, but he also took good care of this one girl who is blind, and she loved him for who he is, not the way he looks, which everybody looks at him and call him a clown. But he is a pretty smart person. Despite of the permanent grin he also has he's pretty smart on knowing how to deal with high society people. He could just cover his face with a scarf and just blend in with the crowd, not even knowing he's there. And of course, yes, they even did a remake of The Man Who Laughs back in 2012. And they gave him the Heath Ledger permanent grin. And then there's another character I think that Hollywood should do. Should do a reboot or even have him appear in the cinematic universe, and which is the Golem. What's that? What's the Golem? Well, believe it or not, the Golem was one of the franchise ever made in the silent era, back in 1910. And it was all written, it was produced, written, directed, and starred by Paul Rigginer. Paul Rigginer, he played the Golem in his Golem movies. And he made maybe 3 or 4 Golem movies. But sadly, most of those movies were burned during the fire. Yeah, there was a huge fire going on in Hollywood, and most of the silent films they had in their vault was burned, lost. But only one Golem movie survived, and it was called Der Golem. And one thing you had to say about the Golem movies, the Golem is more, what's the Golem? Well, the Golem is based by a Jewish folklore. A Jewish folklore about some sort of rabbi priest who found some written incantations in Hebrew. Talks about creating a living being out of clay. So he created this full figure of a being out of clay. And he brought him to life by putting the incantation into a pentagram medallion and put it around his neck, and the medallion brought the Golem to life. But if his Golem remove, he will be gone. He'll be dead. So you only bring him back to life if you put the medallion back on him. And the Golem movies, let's just say he's more of the Godzilla, per se, because most of the movies they made with the Golem in it, sometimes the Golem's a good guy, and sometimes the Golem's the bad guy. And since the Golem is based on Jewish tradition, I had an idea of the Golem's origin. Now, hear me out on this one. I know some of you will be against that idea, but hear me out. I thought, what if the Golem was there during the Holocaust? Where a rabbi gets thrown in those camps, and he starts messing around with the mud, and when some of the guards, those German guards, would be like, he's just some silly old fool messing around with the mud. But he created a Golem, and then he did the incantation, put it in his chest with a medallion, and therefore the Golem came to life, knock out some of those German troops, and freeing most of the prisoners. That would be a good origin story for the Golem, and also be a member of the team as the backbone and the muscle of the team. Since the Golem is big, tough, and strong, and probably strong enough to take down the Frankenstein monster. Oh yeah, and one thing I thought would be a pretty interesting premise right here, this idea, now this is the villain side I thought. Instead of, the Frankenstein monster, he's created by Frankenstein himself, what if Frankenstein was Jekyll and Hyde? Hear me out on this one. Dr. Jekyll, who is a nice, kind gentleman, I mean, he's the nice guy. But when he became Mr. Hyde, he found a journal. It was written by Dr. Frankenstein. So Mr. Hyde wants to do the experiments what Frankenstein did, and therefore created the monster. So now Jekyll is battling against Mr. Hyde, which is going to be more like Dr. Jekyll and Dr. Frankenstein. And one thing I do have an idea, though. Now, this is another idea I thought would be a pretty good idea. What if the creature of the Black Lagoon be a deep one? I know, I decided to add a little something from H.P. Lovecraft. And for those of you who don't know what deep ones are, you should read H.P. Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth. One thing I know about that story, and of course there's that one movie based from it called Dagon, but in the book, it was supposed to be a island village there who start worshipping Cthulhu. And most of the people who worships him starts turning into fish people. And that's what deep ones are. They're fish people who worships Dagon or his wife Hydra or Cthulhu. So I thought the creature of the Black Lagoon should be one of the deep ones. Last member who worships Cthulhu. And everybody knows what deep ones want to do. They want to find human women that they can take advantage and have offsprings. I mean, that's just an idea I'm just slapping in there, folks. And those are the ideas I have. And of course, be pretty cool to have a modern Count Dracula or Frankenstein monster, fire bad, or the werewolf. When the full moon rises, I turn into a werewolf. Or the mummy, aka Imhotep. Nebetu katalni nebetu magana. Or the creature of the Black Lagoon. I just love those monsters. Well, this is my talk of today about classic monsters. If you like my idea so far, please leave a comment down below, hit like and subscribe for more. And this is Michael Grimm, aka Multi-Voice Reviewer, telling you guys, Happy Halloween.